So let me guess, you feel deeply uncomfortable, maybe even low key guilty when it's time to call out your community members who are engaging in harmful behaviors. And they are being problematic, when they are causing harm in ways that they may not even intend to confront them about their behaviors and offer some critical feedback. You're focused on, like, well, what are they going to think about me? How are they going to receive this? What is their reaction going to be? And so you start to really think that, well, if I'm just, position myself as small as possible, if I try to come off as polite and nice in my delivery, maybe this whole accountability process will just go easier for the both of us. But what if I told you that supporting your community members in accountability could actually feel less stressful and more effective when you let go of that need to people please in your advocacy? In this episode of the Own Your Power podcast, I'm going to guide you through a 3-step process, which is going to help you shift from people pleaser to powerhouse in your advocacy efforts. So that way you can confidently confront folks in your organization, workplace, or even just your community groups when they cause harm. So that way they can be accountable to their values and to the mission of your organization. If you're new here, hello. I am Michelle Nicole, and I help justice-driven entrepreneurs and organizations practice accountability from a place of care, courage, and repair using the power of restorative justice. So in my last episode of the podcast, we talked about people pleasing and really broke down like where it comes from and how it's actually rooted in white supremacy culture. People pleasing is this practice where we start to prioritize other folks' feelings and judgments over the very real needs of either ourselves or the marginalized groups that we are trying to advocate for and support. So we start to really care more about what people are thinking about our advocacy efforts instead of focusing on the impact of our advocacy efforts. Right? Because when we people please, we then want to avoid conflict with folks. We don't want to make folks upset. But when that happens, right, we operate in a place where harm can go unchecked and unchallenged in a community space, right? So if you want to learn more about what people pleasing is, why it shows up, right, how it manifests in our daily actions, right, be sure to check out my last episode where I go through all of that in detail. But for today, let's talk about how we can get out of this pattern of people pleasing, right? Because when we are so busy trying to cater to folks, right, we lose the very real missions and the values that we are trying to move forward, particularly if you're part of an organization which is centered on equity values, right? We have to realize that by shrinking ourselves, by silencing ourselves, that does not help our organization move its mission forward, right? It cannot be accountable to the values that it says that it holds if folks do not feel safe enough to speak up against harm when they see it. When we focus on catering to people's feelings, we start to betray our own values, right? And that is not going to get us to the place of being able to dismantle the actual oppressive systems that we say we want to disrupt through the work that we do. When we are so focused on catering to folks, right, because we don't want to offend them, or we don't want them to, think that they're racist or homophobic or transphobic, even though their behavior is replicating that oppressive system, right? But we are so focused on that, folks are just able to stay comfortable, right? And they're able to just stay in their ignorance, and they're just able to continue causing harm. So we just need to stop focusing on how they feel about it and really start focusing like, okay, what is the impact of my action? So how do you start to shift this dynamic so you can feel safe in challenging and confronting harm when you see it, right? How do you start to overcome this fear that you have around like upsetting folks, or, being rejected by people, or being even retaliated against because of your passion, because of your desire to speak up against harmful behavior? So one of the first things that you want to do to disrupt this people-pleasing pattern is to recognize, when is it coming up? How is this behavior showing up for you? Who are you people-pleasing with? Why, right? Start to really get curious and become aware of how it is showing up in your daily interactions. For instance, are you always giving people the benefit of the doubt, right? Even when they don't really deserve it, right? They may have a consistent pattern of harmful behavior, but somehow you're always finding an excuse, right? You're always explaining it away instead of naming it for what it is. Instead of saying, this is replicating this suppressive system. You are gaslighting me here. You are being exploited, right? You are being harmful in this way. Instead of actually seeing the behavior for what it is, you want to explain it away. You want to come up with all of these justifications. And so when you fail to be critical about people's behavior, sometimes that puts you in a position where you are caring more about preserving their reputation or just making sure that they don't have to, again, deal with any discomfort of acknowledging the fact that their behaviors are harmful. Another example of people pleasing can show up where you're finding it really difficult to very clearly explain when someone's behavior is harmful or problematic, right? You're like, I just don't know how to say it, right? You can recognize the behavior. You're not like, disillusioned by what you're seeing, but you convince yourself that you don't know how to tell them about their harmful behavior. And really what that means is that you don't know how to package it up in such a nice way for them to where you think that they would be willing to receive that feedback, right? Again, you're prioritizing their feelings, right? You are focused on how are they going to receive the gift of accountability instead of just dumping it off at their doorstep and being like, you need to take this here. You're welcome. Now this is your work to do, right? I'm going to let you know about this harmful behavior. Now it's your job. Now it's your work to do something about this, to change the behavior, right? And to be accountable for it. But I don't have to say it nicely to you in order to get you to get it. It's not your responsibility to have to package things up and come off so sweet and nice in order to get folks to become accountable, right? That is not your work. As long as you are respectful, as long as you are direct and clear, right? That is the work. That's you. You're doing your part, right? You're making sure that you are not, dehumanizing anyone. You are not being harmful in your delivery, right? But as long as you are upholding those values, you don't have to share your critical feedback in a way that is palatable for them to receive. And a lot of the clients that I work with, they often find themselves in this people pleasing pattern because they are afraid of coming off as too much. They're afraid of coming off as rude or too aggressive. And it's interesting, right? Because the very traits that we need in order to disrupt and dismantle oppressive systems, authenticity, assertiveness, courageousness, or courage, whichever, right? These traits are often framed as something negative. We've learned that being assertive and being direct is rude. And we can then be ridiculed. We can be judged for that. This is especially true for Black and Brown women who face greater scrutiny and backlash for exhibiting these traits, for being bold, for stepping up, for speaking up. So often we are taught to tone it down, to be less, to shrink, right? And not only to, get some validation from others or acceptance, but also to protect ourselves, right? To protect ourselves from very real harms and from unjust consequences. So I want you to start to think about, how is this coming up for you? When are you doing almost any and everything to avoid confrontation, to avoid conflict with your community members, to avoid tough conversations? When do you find yourself not admitting when someone has negatively impacted you and caused harm? So I want you to start to ask yourself, when you see harmful or oppressive dynamics happening in your space, in your organization, or even in your personal relationships, what is your default reaction? Do you choose to be silent? Do you try to be as polite and nice as possible? Do you try to be passive, right? Why do you do that? What do you think that you'll gain from operating in that way, right? And really, what is the impact on you, right? For the long term, when you choose not to speak up, when you betray your own values in order to prioritize the feelings of others, how is that impacting you? And even more importantly, how is that impacting the marginalized communities and people in that space, right? How is your behavior serving them? Who is your behavior serving, right? Is it serving those who are most marginalized and who lack power and who have experienced harm? Or is it serving those who already have social and positional power? Is it serving folks who are causing the harm? So after you start to recognize where people pleasing is showing up for you, the next thing I want you to do is to start to challenge this notion that conflict with your community members is inherently bad or unprofessional. This idea that to have conflict means that you are in battle with people, right? That you are against them. It's us versus them. It's me versus them, right? And I got to arm myself for this fight. So let's let that go so then we can stop avoiding conflict, right? And when we start to challenge this notion, we can then start to lean into restorative justice principles, which are focused on conflict as a tool for transformation, right? Restorative justice actually sees conflict as a responsibility. If we care enough about our community members, if we care about our organizations being accountable to the values that it says that it has, then we have to know that conflict is going to be a part of this work. When we engage in conflict with our people, really it is a sign that we care enough about them, we care enough about the relationship to say something. When you confront your community member about harm that they cause, it's not to get them, but instead it's saying like, I care about you so much that I don't want you to contribute to an oppressive system that does not align with who you are, that does not align with the values that you say that you hold, right? And so I really am here as your community member to support you in accountability, to remind you of the things that you care about. I'm not doing this to get you. I'm not saying this and offering this feedback just to make you feel bad about yourself. And so again, when we lean into these restorative justice values, we start to recognize that being direct in our confrontation is a gift, right? Because I would much rather someone just let me know clearly like what the problem is and that what I did was harmful, rather than talking about me behind my back, saying, having, backside meetings about it with everyone else, or holding it in, building resentment until it gets to such a point where people now are just reacting to me in a really, really negative way, right? And I'm like, where did this come from? Because they've been holding it in, because they haven't actually seen conflict as a gift and said, let me just avoid this. Let me not engage in this. But really, in that avoidance has made the problem worse, has made, the harm now kind of exponential, right? Because not only is the person caused harm, but now people are impacted for a longer time and they may react in a way that is replicating harm as well. So again, the harm cycle just continues when we can disrupt that, right? We can change that and really kind of put an end to that when we just clearly and directly have these critical conversations with each other. And this is why I teach the entrepreneurs and the organizations that I work with how to use a restorative justice lens in their accountability efforts, right? So that way, this whole process does not have to feel so accusatory, so draining, right? Because we are coming from it from an entirely different lens and place than we typically learn about accountability from. We often are, just used to accountability feeling very scary, very dreadful, very like a big thing, right? And instead, when we normalize conflict, when we normalize confrontation and engage in this at the small levels of harm, then we can build up the practice, right? It doesn't have to feel so scary. It doesn't have to feel like this thing that rarely happens because we're doing it normally, right? We're used to it. We're like, oh yeah, oh I use that incorrect language. Oh, thank you, right? Thank you for letting me know so that I can be accountable, so I can change that. Oh, I didn't recognize that. Now I can do something differently. And then as a result, everyone in the process can feel less anxiety, less overwhelm, less stress with it, right? Because we've taken the weight off of the accountability process by leaning into repair as the goal instead of punishment. So when folks have a problem with you confronting them about harmful behavior because they're still upholding that belief that it is bad, it is rude, it is disrespectful in some type of way, I want to encourage you to get curious. Start to ask them some questions to break down this logic. You could ask, what's the problem, right? What's the problem with me bringing this up? Right? Get curious, see what they say, right? Is the issue in that you were yelling? That was I disrespectful? Oh, no, it's just that I said something, right? It's just that I named your behavior. It's just that I called you out about it. That's now their responsibility, right? To start to unpack their resistance to accountability. So if these are some of the skills that you want to be able to build, so you can implement them in your own accountability practice, right? You can more authentically show up and be able to speak boldly and clearly for your values. Stop shrinking yourself. Stop trying to appease others, right? By just holding in your criticisms or your critiques. You're tired of trying to manage other people's reactions to your feedback. You want to just be more authentic in how you show up, so that you can, again, protect your marginalized community members from harm, so that you can create environments that are safer for all of us. Then this is the work that we're going to be doing in my upcoming workshop, 5 Steps to Confronting Harm. So in this workshop, I'm going to teach you how to boldly confront harmful behavior that's showing up either in your professional or personal relationships, even if you or your community members are conflict avoidant. So in this training, you're going to learn how to overcome all of that discomfort that can come with community conflict, how to navigate it in a more seamless way. You're also going to learn how to speak up against harmful and oppressive dynamics that show up in one-on-one interactions, events, meetings, and how to do so from a place of care and courage. And finally, I really want to support you in better navigating all of the shame and the defensiveness that typically plagues our accountability conversations. Instead of not knowing like what to say, how to say it, how to approach someone who is, meeting you with a wall, right? We're going to work through that. So that way you're able to confidently confront folks when they cause harm, but without shrinking yourself in the process. So if you are ready to get to work and make these shifts by leveraging the principles of restorative justice in your own accountability practice, you can sign up for the workshop by clicking the link in the description box below or heading to passionempowerus.com/workshop to join. All right, so let's review where we're at in this process, right? So first, we're recognizing how people pleasing is showing up. We are then doing the work to challenge and unlearn this belief that conflict is bad, right? And we're actually starting to see it as a responsibility. So the last step of this process, right, is going to be the practice, right? This is where you start to build up the practice of engaging in restorative community conflict, right? It's not enough to just think about these concepts and take notes and journal about them all day. How are we going to implement what we're learning, right? How do we actually translate theory into real practice? And what I mean by this is that after you start to recognize where you are people pleasing in your daily interactions, right? I want you to start to take small intentional shifts and changes to stop that, right? To stop that practice, but not in one big foul swoop, right? Where it's like, okay, now I'm going to go out and I'm going to advocate for this big old change in my organization. No, how can you start to build up in small ways your muscle for disruption instead of suppressing your thoughts, right? Instead of being afraid of challenging folks in your space? How do you start to call attention to either small issues of harm, or how do you start to challenge issues of harm, but in a small way? Maybe that means you're just throwing out a question, right? You're not saying, oh, this is harmful and here's why, and I'm going to break this down and I'm going to challenge you in this way. But maybe I'm just offering you a different perspective and I'm saying, what do you mean by that, right? Can you clarify? I'm not sure about the impact of that practice, whatever that looks like in your own space, right? But really just having the commitment to say, when I have a concern, when I have a question, right? When I want to let someone know how they are impacting me or another group, right? Instead of doing all of this mental calculus to, shrink myself and be silent, how can I start to say something? Maybe I'm asking a question for clarification, right? Have you considered how that practice lands for X group, right? You're not just coming out and boldly declaring what they should be doing and saying you're no good and this is terrible and we need better, right? But you're just kind of quote unquote gently, in some ways, but still directly, gently bringing up a concern to them, right? You're maybe stating your opposition, but just in a very clear, direct way, right? Like maybe you're just saying, I disagree with that. Right? I disagree with that perspective, right? Just a small way of challenging. So through practicing this skill, what is going to happen is that you're able to identify like what is easy for you and what's difficult. In what context is, calling out folks pretty simple, pretty easy, like you're able to do it with confidence. And where are you feeling some resistance? Where does it feel especially challenging for you? As you focus and center practice as your priority, that allows you to kind of illuminate like, where do I need to build my skills? Where do I need support in this work, right? What areas of this practice do I need to build up a little bit more? Where am I good? Where do I feel confident at? Where do I, maybe want to lean more into that because I do that well, right? Through the practice, you're going to find that out very quickly. But if you're only, engaging in a practice here and there and casually, you're not going to glean these lessons. So start to think about some of the ways that you can normalize accountability and normalize speaking up for your values in small ways so that you can build up this confidence over time. I hope that you feel more empowered to take up space and to own your voice, right? But there's something that we need to be aware of. Sometimes in our efforts to be more bold, direct, and unapologetic in our accountability efforts, sometimes we can swing the pendulum all the way to the other side, right? Where first we were like over considering and pleasing folks and trying to manage their emotions. Now we are like trampling over them and we have this energy of like policing them and just having this very forceful punishment type of energy in an effort to create change. We are not really centering their humanity, even when they cause harm, right? And we're responding to them in ways that just replicate harm. So we want to avoid this common mistake in our advocacy practice as well, so that we can find the middle ground, right? What does it look like to embody these values, but while still maintaining a level of respect and care for folks, even when they are causing harm? So in my next episode, I'm going to break down how you can avoid this common mistake, so that way you are able to still disrupt harm, but in a way that is still intentional and supportive for your community members. So stay tuned for that, and let's truth talk soon.